Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we like to ignite a spark or shed a ray of light on a Jewish tradition or text. Today, a week before the start of a Jewish New Year, we want to question the seminal innovation of the Hebrew Bible. Was it a rejection of idolatry or a radical reimagining of man's relationship with the divine? So sit back and buckle up and join us as we reimagine God and man in the Torah. So if I had to ask you, and this is a wonderful segue, we're not looking yet. If I had to ask you in a scale, if I had to ask you in a scale of 1 to 10, where does the prohibition of idolatry rank in Judaism's biggest hits, most important things? Where would you rank it?
What's the scale?
1 to 10. 1 is the most important.
Oh, so 1.
1? 2? Now, is it 2 for a technical reason? You divide the first commandment into 2 commandments? Because there is a position that way. But actually, the Bible has done it, right? Because the 10 commandments, the first commandment is, I took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no gods besides me. Lo Elohim acherim al panai. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or the earth below. You should not make a pesel. Today a sculpture would be called a pesel. For the lo temunah. Temunah is a picture. Okay, those are the words that are used. So the question that I pose to you today is, given the fact that it is number 1, maybe 1.5 on the top 10 list, why is it not featured at all in our narrative? In other words, if you think back to the patriarchs and think of Abraham, because Abraham is the one, hold on, we'll get to an answer in a second. But if you think of Abraham, right, Abraham's the guy who started the Abrahamic religions, and what do they all have in common? Yes, on the one hand, there's monotheism of one God, but on the other hand, it's a radical rejection of any image to God, any physical embodiment of God, of idolatry. So where, prior to this commandment, is there any talk? I mean, if you start with the first commandment, it says, God took you out of Egypt. There's a lot of narrative about going out of Egypt. So it's not a big surprise that it appears in the 10 commandments. But where does the rejection of idolatry appear in the Bible, in the Hebrew scripture, until this point? One of you were thinking something?
Yeah, isn't Abraham enough to something, enough to pestle, enough to God, something?
His father's, he destroys his father's.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
What?
Right? That's the Midrash.
That's
They have it on there.
So that's a midrash.
Wasn't it something with Moses and Israel? No? I don't know.
Yitro was a priest, and he might have been a monotheist. But I think the knee-jerk reaction, we're sitting in a Hebrew school classroom, the knee-jerk reaction is exactly the one you all just gave. And then you add, but it's a midrash. So now we can turn over our cheat sheets, and instead of saying it's a midrash, let's read the midrash. So, who wants to read? It's Cliff Note number 2, and we can read it in English. Who wants to read Bereishit Rabbah 38? Bob? Israeli. We got 2 Bobs here today. Nice.
Yeah, let him. You can call me, I start life out as Izzy, because there are always many Bobs.
Nice.
And Haran died in the presence of his father Terah. Rabbi Iya, the grandson of Rabbi Ada of Yafa, said, Terah was a worshiper of idols. One time he had to travel to a place, and he left Abraham in charge of his store. When a man would come in to buy idols, Abraham would ask, how old are you? They would reply 50 or 60. Abraham would then respond, woe to him who is 60 years old and worships something made today. The customer would be embarrassed, and he would leave. A woman entered carrying a dish full of flour. She said to him, this is for you, offer it before them. Abraham took a club to his hand and broke all of the idols and placed the club in the hands of the biggest idol. When his father returned, he asked, who did all of this? Abraham replied, I can't hide it from you. A woman came in carrying a dish of flour and told me to offer it before them. I did, and one of them said, I will eat it first, and another said, I will eat it first. The biggest one rose, took a club, and smashed the rest of it. Sarah said, what do you think you can trick me? They don't have cognition. Abraham said, do your ears hear what your mouth is saying?
Okay, so what do we learn from this famous story? And from our response, everybody here, for those of you who just walked in, when we asked the question, when did this, besides the Ten Commandments, when did this concept of rejecting idolatry appear in Judaism? It was at the story of Abraham. And then some of the people in the cheap seats in the back said, that's a midrash, that's not in the Torah, okay? But this is the source right here. And the fact that we have internalized it so much, number one, shows how powerful of a midrash it is. Number two, I would argue, it actually points a flashlight on the fact that in the text itself, there's nothing. Abraham leaves his homeland, comes to the land that God promised him. If anything, he's a guy who believes in this God. And not that God. Not that there is no that God, but this is his God, personal God, promised him the land. That's the narrative in the whole Bible. So it's pretty amazing that the number one hit of Judaism is no idols, no idolatry, and nowhere does it appear. The word pesel and the word tmunah does not appear in the whole book of Genesis. Yes, Bob?
What about Exodus?
Oh yeah, well in Exodus, this is where I quoted the Ten Commandments.
Before that.
Really not so much.
What about Egypt? What was happening in Egypt when they were slaves?
You know, it's a story of emancipation. It's a story of freedom.
You don't think that there were idols in Egypt? You don't think that whatever was happening in Egypt?
There could have been, and of course it's a midrash. Why did they take the lamb and tie it outside the door? Does it say anywhere in the Chumash that the lamb was the god of Egypt? No, that's our commentators again. Let's stick to Genesis.
All right.
So now I have the next question. Without looking down, where is the only other mention of idols in Genesis? Okay, Rachel. Okay, what happens with Rachel? Let's turn the page over and look at source number 3. Genesis 31:19. Meanwhile, Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household idols. She took his teraphim. So we're kind of getting a sense, like they say about the Eskimos, they had 10 words for snow. We have a lot of words for idols. So far we've had tmunah, we've had pesel, now we have teraphim.
And in the midrash, it's salamim, so selim.
Very good.
I was wondering what actually selim is
Image.
I mean, so that's
Matzlema in Hebrew is a camera.
Yeah.
Okay?
So, but I mean, is that a common word for idol?
We're going to get to that. Okay, and I highlighted Selim, so it's going to come up again. Okay, so now we have Laban. Rachel steals Laban's idols. Why did she steal them? The text doesn't say. Rashi comes and says, and Rachel stole the teraphim. Her intention was to wean her father from idol worship. So again, the rabbis have to introduce to this story an element of the prohibition against idol worship. But nowhere is it clear in the story that she stole them for that purpose. Let's go a few verses further and see if it actually holds up. So Laban catches up to the Rachel and the rest of the group and Yaakov and says, why did you take my teraphim? Why did you take my idols? So Jacob says, but anyone with whom you find your gods shall not remain alive. He's sure no one in his clan would have stolen the guy's idols. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have of yours and take it. Jacob looks at this as a totally transactional thing, and he goes on to say, I worked for you for 7 years, and then another 7 years. I never stole a dime from you. How could you say I stole these idols? No theology here. Rashi again comes in. He says, in consequence to the fact that Jacob said anyone who has these idols will die, Rachel actually died outside of the land of Israel. So she was punished for stealing the idols. Again, hard to make a theological argument on the previous Rashi that she was doing her father a favor by taking away a pack of cigarettes and hoping he'd break the habit. Okay? So,
Where she die?
well, Kever Rachel is on the way into the promised land. She's a Moshe type of figure. She died in childbirth through Binyamin. So anyway, it doesn't appear anywhere in terms of this idolatry, but we have it ingrained within us. And I think sometimes you got to believe that something that's totally ingrained within us, there must be something there. So I think that this concept of the word tselem should ring a bell. We said before in the Midrash that in the idol store, what was the language that the Midrash used? Rab Chia, the grandson of Rab Ada, said, Terach was a worshiper of idols. Terach oved tselamim haya. Now we normally talk about idols as what? How would you say idols in Hebrew typically? You say oved kachavim, avodah zarah, but that all relates to avodah, to the worship. Okay? Avodah zarah, zar means strange worship. Don't worship like us. Ovedet kachavim is someone who serves the stars. Okay? So tzelamim is a word that we can add to our list of vocabulary, but I highlighted it because I want to ask you, does it ring a bell? Okay. The image of God. Okay? So now we turn to source number 8. No. Thank you. We turn to source number 7. And God says, let me turn over the page and read it in English. And God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. In Hebrew, the word is B'tsalmenu Kidmutenu. Okay, so tselem we already came across. The Hebrew word matzlema, camera, comes from that. It's image. And kidmutenu.
It is resemblance.
So,
Domeh. Domeh.
likeness.
Likeness. Domeh means in modern Hebrew, ani domeh le actually. I'm similar to my brother. Okay? So it says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. They shall rule, meaning man, over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth. So first of all, it's male and female. This is Genesis, they call this Genesis 1, because there were two accounts of the creation of man and woman. In the second account, man is created first, and you have the whole rib. Here, they are created together, male and female, and both are in the image of God. That's one thing to note. Let's see how this word selem is used, and demut is used going forward in the book of Genesis and elsewhere. So if you look at 5, it says, Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam, this is the record of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. So again, the second time that it uses it, again, it uses it in reference to the image of God. 9, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for in his image did God make man. So here too, now we're starting to get an ethical, a moral thing to it. If man is created in the image of God and you slay a man, it's a big deal, okay? Because you're slaying a part of God. Numbers. Does this word tselem, which we found in the Midrash, is used for graven images? Is it used also in our texts, in the biblical text, for graven images? So if you look at Numbers 33:52, You shall dispossess all the inhabitants of the earth. You shall destroy all their figured objects. You shall destroy all their molten images, and you shall demolish all their cult places. So in the Hebrew it says, Ve'iradetem et kol mashkitam. So there's another word we can add to our vocabulary list. Ve'et kol tzalmei masechotam, and all of their poured or molten images. So here, the same word that is used for the image of God is also used for graven images. So, you might walk in here and saying it's a play on word that in the English we talk about the image of God and we talk about graven images. Does that flow through the Hebrew? The answer is it does. The word tselem can be used both for the image of God and for graven images. Yes.
Different is that you read the Tselem Elohim, it means the Tselem of God. It relates the Tselem to God when it talks about God creating Adam in his image. But when Bamidbar, the last one he wrote the Salmei Masechotem, he connects the word Tselem to the idol type, to the Masecha, which is like, to another graven image, not to God.
I think Masecha means limsok, to pour.
Is,
a mask?
Yeah.
Well, here it says molten images.
So Masecha is a mask.
Okay.
So it relates Salmei. It's almost like used as an adjective, not as a noun.
Okay. Definitely, it can be used in different nuances, but the bottom line is we're not making a stretch here. There is a direct connection for anybody who would read this text between saying something is B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, and knock down your idols, knock down your tzlamim. We saw it in the Midrash in Rabbinic Hebrew, and we're seeing it also in Biblical Hebrew. Now, I've quoted some scholars who have talked about this, and by the way, you've probably all heard the expression imitatio Dei, Latin, which means to copy God's ways. Okay? There's another, and when you have a word like that, that means there's a whole long theology written about it. So Thomas Aquinas probably has pages and pages on copying God's act. God is holy, therefore we are holy. There's also a very strong tradition.
Didn't the rabbis start that before?
Lahadmot. They call it Lahadmot. Yes, it's in the Bible. It says literally, I am holy, you shall be holy. But the theological word for that was imitatio Dei. The theological word in Latin, the theological word that we are talking about today is imagio Dei, in the image of God. So it is a very strong thing. I got focused on this whole issue from the commentary of Shai Held, and he quotes some Christian scholars, as he's likely to do, because we don't have a monopoly on wisdom. So if you look at 11, it just talks basically about this whole concept of what we've been talking about the linkage between tselem and idol. It's basically something that's carved or hewn, statued or copy. So there is no question. We have been walking in the direction of tselem Elokim can also be for idol worship. For the typical person hearing the word tselem Elokim for the first time, they would have made the trip in the opposite direction. They would have said, how can you associate a word like tselem, which is a physical, hewn, touchable, tactile, tangible object, with God, or at least the God that we've grown to appreciate, which is a God who's infinite, who has no name, so forth and so on. So that's the challenge of tselem Elokim. Okay, if you, we go a little bit further, just a few more quotes of how the word tselem is used. I would like to skip to Amos, which is 15. And it says, and you shall carry off your king, Sikut and Yikiyum, the images you have made for yourself of your astral deity. So we start to see this tselem also associated with an image of the God. So what we do find in Genesis is a rejection of the kings. Remember the battles between some kings and other kings? Abraham shows up in this land that he was promised by God, and he doesn't spend a lot of time rejecting gods and idols, but he does establish that this land was given to him by God as a paternity, and the gods and the people who serve those gods in the country have to give respect to his rights. So here you have now a linkage between Tselem and the political powers that be. So if you look in Daniel 3:1, King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits broad. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So again, that's Nebuchadnezzar Malka Avad Salam. He made a statue. This was a statue of himself. He was the deity. So there is this sense that there was an aspect of idol worship that had to do with political leadership, and the aspect was that the king would set up a statue in his likeness. He represented God, and people worshipped the idol in the same way that they worshipped the king. Okay? So there is that aspect of it that I just want to sensitize us to. So let's go to archaeology now. There was any questions, comments? If you turn to see, take a look at this guy over here. This is as close as you're ever going to see to seeing somebody called Tselem Demut. And why is that? Remember the Rosetta Stone? It was an amazing find because it had 2, maybe 3 or 4 languages on the same stone. This guy over here had 2 different it was found in Syria. He was a king, and he had 2 different languages written underneath his sculpture. They're shown here. And they used the word in Aramaic and Assyrian for SLM, Tselem, and they also use the word Demut. So based on this discovery, the scholars picked up on what we were saying before from Daniel, and they said it's very likely that in those days the king would put a statue in front of every town. It would be his Tselem, his Demut. That's the language that would use. That's the trigger, the association that those words and that image would have you. And people would worship that Tselem in a way showing honor to the ruling power of the king. And based on that thought process, scholars have come up with, and Shihel agrees with this and has brought it forward, on a royal interpretation of Tselem Elokim, as opposed to a theological one. And what anyone who was aware of this usage of language in those days would have heard if they heard an Abraham or a Jew or a Hebrew saying that I am created, man is created b'Tselem Elohim. What ultimately they're saying was, I am that statue that represents God. And so humankind, revolutionary, and it sounds revolutionary, and it sounds very sophisticated, and whenever that we come across something like this, we have to ask ourselves, are we projecting back in time? Are we putting this on a text that doesn't support it? But the truth is, there was a visceral association between Tselem and Demut and a statue which represented the king. And what the Hebrew Bible was saying in a radical revolutionary way is that every human being is that statue, and they represent the king, God. Okay? And that's how it would have been understood. And in a sense, rejecting that king and worshiping a piece of stone or a piece of some other thing instead of worshiping man and humanity would have been more in line with what we kind of do see in Genesis, which is God is the only king that is available, and God is the only king that rules, and Abraham is saying that he represents God, and this is what God has commanded him to do. Okay, so it's less of a theological thing and more of a political thing. Go ahead, Martin.
What popped into my head was Al Kisei Lo Yesh. It was a stranger. I mean, can't be king.
Can't sit on his throne.
Can't sit on his throne. And that sort of came into my head. Why, I don't know with what you are saying, but it sort of popped in, and they say it. We'll hear it later on in the October. I don't know if that has any connection to what you're saying, but
I think it resonates. I think, given the season that we're in, where we are making God king. If you have to look at everything that we do in Rosh Hashanah and every change that we make in the liturgy, we change the Shemona Esrei. We add, instead of Kel HaKadosh, we go Melech HaKadosh. Everything that we are doing in Rosh Hashanah is making God the king. Okay? So Malchiot is a very, very big concept. And part of, and I've talked about this before, and I'm going to talk about it on first day Rosh Hashanah morning, about what it means to make God king. But for the purposes of today, again, the Bible is playing with this concept of kingship here and saying, Tzelem Elokim, human beings are that representative of God. Now the question is, how does that translate? And we're going to go back and look at the paragraph that we started with about image of God. The critique of this, typical critique of Tzelem Elokim in the image of God and a royalty interpretation, there's one critique that's given by feminists, and there's another critique given by environmentalists. So the feminist critique is, this is a typical patrilineal type of thing, that God and now man is the king of the house, and he gets to decree and have dominion over everything. The critique of the environmentalists is, look what it says. It says that we can do anything with this earth. So if you have, and sometimes it blows me away, how you can be a born-again Christian and not be concerned about the environment. To me, it's so obvious that we are stewards of the environment, but they would use these verses saying we have dominion over the fish of the sea, and it's in Genesis 1. I mean, come on, it's all written there. So those are the critiques. Let's go back to page number 7, and it says, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. So first of all, the royalists, the people that use this interpretation, focus on why does it say it in the plural? Who is he talking to? And they say this fits very well with this kind of a regal approach, where God is talking to his tributaries and to his secretaries, and he's saying, let's go ahead and make a representative out there. So it fits very well into a royal interpretation. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, all the creeping things. If you ask me, and this is what Shai Held argues very forcefully, this isn't saying that you can take advantage of it. Once you're a political ruler, once you represent a political ruler, you're in charge. All of a sudden, each one of us, called human beings, Bnei Adam, is in charge, is responsible. In terms of Jewish commentaries, I bring it here somewhere, the Sad Yugon has a very small commentary on the Bible, and when he gets to this verse, and he says that you shall rule, he focuses on the word rule, and he said shalit. The whole question of image of God means that we have been given the power to rule. So, and if you look at the verse, it does say rule. In Hebrew, it says, so I'm going to say, no, v'yirdu. Well, you know, in the Hebrew, it needs Sad Yugon to say it, because the Hebrew itself, v'yomer Elokim na'aseh adam b'tzalmenu kidmatenu v'yirdu b'degat hayam. So the Sad Yugon says v'yirdu shalit. V'yirdu means you shall rule over these. But again, it's a question of ruling with responsibility. You're the guy in charge. You just got elected mayor of the town, buddy. anything that happens in that town, a pothole, you're responsible for. So to me, to argue against this verse and to argue against this whole concept of in the image of God, as that gives us free license to abuse the earth, is not supported by the text at all. Especially if you look at it from the perspective we're looking at it, which B'Tselem Elokim means that we now become, each one of us, that unique statue that stands in front of our own Dalet Amot, our own 4 cubics, and is responsible to rule over it. It's anything that happens, it's on us. Go on. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female. From a feminist point of view, every woman is created in the image of God. I mean, I don't understand how they can even make the choice and say this is paternal and that this is the old, every man is the kingdom of his castle type of thing. It literally says, B'Tselem Elokim, male and female he created he them. So I think...
That's the difference between what's written and the way it was practiced. I mean, it may say that, but culturally it's been, male-dominant paternalism.
Absolutely. And there's no question that these verses are taken in that fashion by male chauvinists through the ages, just as they've been taken by people that are raping the earth. It gives me, I have license from this, but I think if you read it in context, you certainly read it in context in terms of this kind of royal interpretation that we're giving, that this is a political interpretation of who has authority, and that God is giving every human being the authority. With authority comes responsibility, and I think that's pretty clear from here. And then it goes on. So I think that from that perspective, this is something that is radical, and I think that it's also supported very much by the text, especially if there is any basis for what they discovered in terms of this statue, that Tselem and Demut literally were used in the vernacular, in the way people spoke, as a reference to these kind of statues that represented the king. And when anyone would be listening to this, and they would say, B'Tselem Elohim, and they know what the Jewish God is, that he's the only almighty God, the infinite, and all of that, it's a radical statement. And it's a radical statement about humanity. And I think that at some level, the most basic text bears us out. You don't have to project all that much into it. Let's see. Yes?
Question?
Please.
Well, I saw a funny bumper sticker this summer that said, if God is your co-pilot, switch seats. Meaning God's really not in charge. God's really in charge, not us. But it seems like the idea of idol worship extends to the non-physical now, right? So people will say, well, if you don't believe in God, maybe your ism is capitalism or communism or socialism, right? And maybe some of these are forms of idol worship. So my basic question to you is, if you look at the progress of man through the long arc of history, and we have this idea of not worshiping idols, do you think humanity is making progress? I know it's a big question.
Yeah. Look, I think as we go through this year of Kavanah, we're going to probably have some much more traditional interpretations of idol worship, which are much more in line with Exodus, which much more align with later thinking, and typically they come to do with misplaced venerance. In other words, you're supposed to be looking at the big picture, at God, and you worship something instead. And there are even trains within Judaism that say that it's okay, just not for Jews, because Jews have a special relationship with God. They don't need an intermediary. There are forms of idol worship that the rabbis look kindly to. But you're right, it's all about isms, and it's about co-pilots, and it's about direct pilot, the first pilot, and and stuff like that. I think what this is doing, given the fact that there's nothing mentioned in all of Genesis in the narrative about Abraham, who we all attribute this revolutionary paradigm shift to, we have to go back and say, how was Tselem used? And that's all I'm saying, and it's very political, and it's less about, I'm not we're not monarchists anymore. We don't believe in this, but certainly understanding in their language, kingship was monarchy, was the ruling thing. And what I want to do is get back to Rosh Hashanah and talk about how this impacts or how this helps us understand the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, which is Malchiot, Shofrot, V'Zichronot. I'm just going to focus on Malchiot. Yes.
Ask, just to follow up your comment, another ism is atheism.
Mm-hmm.
So how does atheism play into what you're saying? Because atheism is not about idol worship. Atheism is basically, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in anything, related to some deity or idol or anything. So to me, that is the real question in today's world, not necessarily an ism like capitalism, but that is a very profound counterpoint to, and most people today, either they're Jewish, but they're secular. So I would perhaps say that there is something beyond just this or this.
So let me just answer. The last quote is 27, and it's from Erich Fromm. And he wrote a book called You Shall Be as Gods. And what he took from what we're saying is he says you have to look on both sides of it. So if you accept God as king, that's the theism, you're rejecting man as king. That anybody can do. You're rejecting authority. The takeaway from this, according to Erich Fromm, is that by making God our king, what we are saying to every king, whether they're Achashverosh or whether they're Pharaoh, you do not rule me. Okay? And so I don't think he was a theist necessarily. What you can do in terms of this radical departure of Abraham is you can say it's less about who he picked and more about who he rejected.
Right. I also think that, again, this is just me, but I think there are ways of connecting with God in a way that is different than what perhaps a long time ago people understood what a king was. We're not living in a world.
Authority. I think we can say authority.
Authority is a different thing, but king is something like what do you call it? A pharaoh, a king of England. It's royalty. It's something above any other human being. You have a royalty. We reject that. So all I'm saying is all of what you're saying makes sense. But I also think that there is, in today's world, we have another.
It has to be translated, and there has to be another paradigm.
We have another paradigm.
But I think from this paradigm you can see a rejection, and we'll get into this when we get into Maimonides' negative attributes, where he said it's not what you say about God, you can say what God is not. Okay? But anyway, I just want to finish, given the fact that Rosh Hashanah is coming, and we've made this kind of pivot to saying this whole question of idolatry and false images has to do with false authority, and that ultimately giving away your responsibility to represent God in everything you do. So as you know, we celebrate on Rosh Hashanah the birth of the world. Only there's a second opinion that says no, we're celebrating the birth of man. 7-day difference. So if you look at if you look at 25, Pesikta de Rav Kahana, on Rosh Hashanah, your word stands firm in heaven. Rabbi Eliah learned on the 25th of Elul, the world was created. And he cited Rav Kahana, who learned that Rabbi Eliah learned during the blowing of Rav Sora. This day is the beginning of the works, is remembrance of the first day. For as a law for Israel, a ruling of God. On the nation was written for the sword. So on Rosh Hashanah, Adam was created. So if you follow this interpretation, and it is, again, we're talking about the day that Adam was created was the day that he was charged with B'Tselem Elokim, was the day he was charged with making God king, was the day he was charged with having to dedicate his life to representing that king. In the first hour, it came into his mind, God's mind. In the second hour, he ruled among the heavenly hosts. This is God saying to everybody, should we create man? On the third hour, he gathered the dirt. This is God creating man. This is the Tselem Elohim moment. In the 4th, he kneaded it. He kneaded the dirt. Remember, the guy's name is Adam. In the 5th, he formed him. In the 6th, he raised the golem. It uses the word golem onto his feet. In the 7th, he threw into him a soul. In the 8th, he brought him into the Garden of Eden. In the 9th, he commanded him not to eat of the tree of knowledge. In the 10th, Adam transgressed his command. 10 hours alive. In the 11th, he was judged. In the 12th hour, he was pardoned by the Holy One, blessed be he. Said to him God, Adam, this is a sign for your children. Just as you came in judgment before me on this day and went out pardoned, so also in the future your children will come before me in judgment on this day and leave pardoned. So according to this midrash, not only is Rosh Hashanah on the day that man was created, B'Tselem Elokim, it was the day that he was given his only one commandment. God wanted to show that you don't have dominion over the world to destroy it. You have dominion over the world because I gave you that dominion. You have to respect it. So that one tree, you have dominion over all the trees. Not that one tree. The guy failed. He got the wrong interpretation. He gets kicked out, and that is the link, a natural link between Rosh Hashanah and everything that we discussed today. So I wish you all a Shana Tova, and we should all live up to the Tzelem Elokim in which we are created. And now, as is our custom, we will conclude with some appropriate music. I started looking for Shlomo Carlebach's Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, which I wanted to use and which we will listen to. But in the process, I found another rendering of Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, which is very popular these days, featuring Benny Alabaz. And I'd like to compare and contrast the two renderings because I think they say a lot about where we are today in terms of what it means that Hashem is our King and maybe that we represent that King. In today's Jewish music, so much is full of bluster, entitlement, empowerment, elitism, even messianism. And that's what comes across to me anyway in the first rendering of Hashem Melech. And in the second rendering by Shlomo Carlebach, it represents the music I grew up with, which was introspective, heartfelt, a sense of quest and call to responsibility and growth. In any case, both tunes are really appealing, and I'll play Shlomo Carlebach's last, hoping that that's the one that will stick with you. Anyway, Shana Tova, wishing you a wonderful year where we can all live to the potential of the Tzelem Elokim, the image of God, which is our mandate.
Hashem אבל אף על פי כן השם ימלך בכל המקום השם